The silence in the ballroom was a weapon, and it was aimed directly at the heart of a young woman in a waitress uniform. On one side stood Damian Sterling, a man whose net worth could buy the entire city block. On the other, Clara Hayes, a woman whose only asset was a secret she thought she'd buried long ago. He pointed to the gleaming $200,000 Steinway grand piano, a smirk playing on his lips. "Play for us," he commanded, the order echoing in the vast opulent room. He didn't want music. He wanted a spectacle. He wanted to break her. But he made one fatal miscalculation. He never imagined the ghost of Carnegie Hall was hiding behind the tired eyes of a waitress. The Celeste Ballroom wasn't just a venue, it was a statement. Perched atop the Sterling Tower in downtown Chicago, its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of the sprawling city lights, a glittering carpet laid out for the financial deities who gathered within its walls. The air inside smelled of money, a heady mix of expensive perfume-aged scotch, and the faint, clean scent of freshly printed ambition. For Clara Hayes, it smelled of bleach and exhaustion. At 24, Clara's life was a world away from the one she served. Her reality was a cramped studio apartment in Logan Square, the constant worry of late rent and the dull ache in her feet that never quite subsided. Her uniform, a crisp black dress more functional than elegant, was an invisibility cloak. She moved through crowds of millionaires and billionaires with practiced efficiency, a silent phantom refilling champagne flutes and clearing away canapes. They looked through her, their eyes gliding past as if she were part of the furniture. She preferred it that way. To be seen was to be judged. Tonight was different. It was the engagement party of Damian Sterling himself, the owner of the tower, and his fiancée, Isabel Ashworth. Damian was a titan of industry, a man carved from sharp angles and ruthless decisions. He was new money, a fact the city's old guard never let him forget, and he compensated with a belligerent display of wealth that bordered on parody. His suits were too sharp, his watches too large, his smile too predatory. Isabel Ashworth was the opposite. She was the polished, perfect product of generational wealth, her family name etched into the stone facades of libraries and museums. She was elegant, reserved, and carried an air of melancholic grace. To Damian, she was the ultimate acquisition, the key to unlocking the acceptance he so desperately craved. Clara had been assigned to the main bar, a long slab of polished marble near the centerpiece of the room, a magnificent Steinway Model D concert grand piano. Its ebony finish gleamed under the crystal chandeliers, a silent, imposing beast. All night a professional pianist had been playing gentle ambient jazz, the kind of music designed to be heard but not listened to. From her station, Clara watched the couple. Damian was loud, his laughter a booming declaration of his own importance. He held court, one hand gripping Isabel's waist as if she were a trophy. Isabel smiled, a practiced, perfect curve of her lips that never quite reached her eyes. Clara saw a familiar hollowness there, the look of someone playing a part. She knew that look. She saw it in the mirror every morning. The night wore on and the guests grew louder, their inhibitions dissolving in a river of vintage champagne. Clara's back throbbed. She was on a double shift covering for her friend Sophia, who had called in sick. She just needed to make it to 2 a.m. It was during a brief lull as the hired pianist took a break that Damian Sterling's attention snagged on something. Clara, lost in a moment of thought, was unconsciously drumming her fingers on the marble countertop. It wasn't a random rhythm. It was a complex, syncopated pattern, the phantom muscle memory of a Chopin etude. Her fingers, long and slender, moved with a fluid grace that seemed utterly out of place with her server's apron. Damian's eyes narrowed. He saw not a tired waitress, but an opportunity. He was growing bored of the polite conversation and sycophantic laughter. He needed a new form of entertainment, a way to demonstrate his power in a more creative, more cruel fashion. He exchanged a look with his closest associate, a shark in a Tom Ford suit named Richard Klein. "See that?" Damian murmured, nodding toward Clara. "The help has aspirations." Richard chuckled. "Everyone thinks they're a star. Let's find out." Damian said, his voice laced with a cold amusement. He pushed himself away from his group, his movements drawing the attention of those nearby. Isabel watched him, a flicker of apprehension crossing her face. She knew that look in his eyes. It was the look he got before a hostile takeover, the gleam of a predator about to play with its food. Clara was wiping down a spill when the shadow fell over her. She looked up into the piercing blue eyes of Damien Sterling. "You," he said, his voice cutting through the din. "The waitress. What's your name?" "Clara, sir," she replied, her own voice barely a whisper. Her heart began to pound. Direct interaction with a client of this stature was rare and usually meant something was wrong. "Clara," he repeated, savoring the name. "I've been watching you. You seem to have a little rhythm in your fingers." He gestured grandly towards the silent piano. "Our pianist is on a break. The silence is dreadfully boring. Why don't you go over there and play us a tune?" The question hung in the air, instantly silencing the conversations around them. Every head turned. It wasn't a request. It was a challenge, a public summons. Clara stared at him, her mind going blank with panic. He couldn't be serious. "Sir, I don't play—" She stammered a lie that felt like acid on her tongue. Damien's smile widened, but it held no warmth. It was a baring of teeth. "Don't be modest. I saw you. A little chopsticks, perhaps. Mary had a little lamb. Surely you can manage that. It's for the amusement of my guests." He was intentionally framing it as a childish, foolish task. He was painting her as a deluded servant who fantasized about a life she could never have. The people around them began to snicker. They saw the setup. They saw the powerless waitress and the powerful millionaire, and they were eager for the inevitable, delicious humiliation. "Damien, don't," Isabel said softly, stepping forward. Her voice was firm but quiet. He waved her off without looking at her. "Nonsense, darling. We're just having a bit of fun. What's the harm?" He turned his full attention back to Clara, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper only she could hear. "Listen to me. My guests are bored. You are here to serve. Right now, serving means playing that piano. Or you can collect your final paycheck on the way out. Your choice." The threat was clear, brutal, and absolute. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She couldn't lose this job. It was all that stood between her and eviction. She looked past Damien's shoulder and saw her manager, Mr. Peterson, wringing his hands, his face a mask of helpless pity. He couldn't intervene. Damien Sterling could have him fired with a single phone call. Clara was trapped. Every eye in the room was on her, 100 pairs of predatory, expectant eyes. They were waiting for her to crumble. They were waiting for her to stumble over to the piano, plunk out a few clumsy notes, and become the joke of the evening, a story they would tell for weeks. Damien stepped back, creating a path for her to the piano. "Well?" he boomed, his voice dripping with condescending delight. "Don't keep us waiting. Entertain us." For a moment, Clara's world tilted. The glittering lights of the city outside seemed to mock her. The weight of her dead-end life, of her buried dreams, pressed down on her, threatening to crush her. He wanted to embarrass her. He wanted to make an example of her. She took a shaky breath, her mind racing. She could refuse and be fired. Or she could walk to that piano and face the music in every sense of the word. Slowly her feet began to move. One step, then another. The walk from the bar to the piano, a distance of maybe 30 feet, felt like a mile-long march to her own execution. The whispers and muffled laughter of the guests followed her like a physical force pushing her forward. She didn't look at them. She couldn't. She kept her eyes fixed on the gleaming black instrument, the tombstone of a life she had long since mourned. The polished wood of the piano bench was cool against Clara's trembling legs as she sat down. The 88 keys stared back at her, a stark landscape of black and white, of possibilities and regrets. For 5 years she hadn't touched a piano. Not a real one. She had occasionally let her fingers dance on countertops, on library tables, on her own lap, tracing the melodies that still lived in her head, but she hadn't dared to produce a single sound. The grief was too much. The memory it invoked was too sharp. The silence in the ballroom had transformed. It was no longer just a lull in the party's noise. It was a heavy, expectant void. It was the silence of an arena, the collective breath-holding of a crowd waiting for blood. Clara could feel Damien Sterling's smug gaze burning into her back. She could hear the faint, mocking whispers of the guests. "This is just cruel." Poor girl. He's cornered her. "I can't watch this. Actually, I can't look away." Isabel Ashworth stood near the edge of the crowd, her champagne flute untouched in her hand. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable. She looked at Clara not with mockery, but with a strange, intense curiosity, as if she were seeing something no one else could. Clara's hands hovered over the keys, her fingers shaking so badly she feared she couldn't press a single note without it chattering. The threat of unemployment was a cold knot in her stomach. But as she sat there on the precipice of utter humiliation, something else began to stir within her. A flicker of defiance. Damien wanted a joke. He wanted chopsticks. He wanted her to fail. He had stripped her of her dignity, reduced her from a person to a prop for his evening's entertainment. In that moment, something inside her snapped. The fear didn't vanish, but it was suddenly overshadowed by a tidal wave of anger. A cold, clear rage that had been dormant for years. He would not have this. He would not take this from her, too. She closed her eyes, shutting out the sea of judgmental faces. She shut out Damien. She shut out the Celeste ballroom and the smell of expensive gin. She let the noise of the present fade away and reached back in time, back to a small, sunlit room filled with the scent of old books and lemon polish. She saw her mother, her face worn with illness but her eyes bright with love, sitting in an old armchair. "Your music is a gift, my love," her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "It's not for them. It's not for applause or for fame. It's the part of your soul you share with the world. Never let anyone make it small, not even yourself." Her mother had died just weeks before Clara was supposed to leave for her full scholarship at Juilliard. The medical bills had been astronomical, wiping out every penny they had. The scholarship was gone. The dream was gone, and the music had died with her mother. Clara had packed it all away, buried it under the crushing weight of survival. But her mother's voice, clear as a bell in her memory, cut through the fog of fear. Never let anyone make it small. Damien Sterling wanted to make her small. Clara opened her eyes. The trembling in her fingers had stopped. Her hands were steady. A profound, almost unnerving calm settled over her. She took one final deep breath and placed her hands on the keys. She didn't play chopsticks. The first notes that shattered the ballroom's silence were not the clumsy tinklings of an amateur. They were the thunderous, explosive opening chords of Frédéric Chopin's Etude Op. 25, number 11, known as the Winter Wind. It was an audacious, almost insane choice. The Winter Wind is a maelstrom of a piece, a relentless tempest of notes that demands not just technical mastery, but ferocious emotional power. It is one of the most difficult pieces in the entire piano repertoire, a musical Everest that seasoned concert pianists approach with reverence and fear. For a moment, the audience was simply confused. The sheer volume and complexity of the sound was jarring. This wasn't the work of a fumbling waitress. This was something else entirely. Then the piece truly began. Clara's left hand unleashed a furious roaring cascade of chromatic scales, a howling gale of sound that swept through the room. Her right hand flew across the upper register, playing a dramatic, passionate melody that soared above the storm. Her body moved with the music, a symphony of controlled power. She was no longer a waitress in a cheap uniform. She was a conductor, a sorceress, a force of nature commanding the storm that erupted from the piano. The snickers in the crowd died instantly, replaced by slack-jawed disbelief. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Every single person in the room was frozen, utterly captivated by the raw, untamed talent erupting from the stage. Damien Sterling's smug smile faltered, then melted away completely. His face cycled through a series of emotions: confusion, then shock, then a dark, thunderous rage. This wasn't the script. She was supposed to be a clown, not a virtuoso. She was stealing his spotlight. She was turning his cruel joke back on him, transforming his stage of humiliation into her moment of triumph. Isabel Ashworth's mask of polite indifference shattered. Her eyes were wide, her lips slightly parted in awe. She took a step closer and then another, drawn in by the magnetic force of the performance. She wasn't just hearing music, she was witnessing a resurrection. And then there was Nathaniel Donovan. He stood near the back, a man who, unlike Damien, wore his wealth with the quiet confidence of old money. His family had been patrons of the arts for generations. His own father was the celebrated conductor Sir Malcolm Donovan. Nathaniel had been dragged to the party by a mutual business acquaintance and had been counting the minutes until he could leave. He had seen the entire ugly exchange between Damien and the waitress and had been disgusted. Now he listened, his head cocked, his expression one of intense professional concentration that slowly morphed into pure, unadulterated wonder. He wasn't just hearing a talented pianist. He had the ear to recognize something far rarer. He was hearing a prodigy. The phrasing, the emotional depth, the flawless technique, it was all there. This wasn't just a performance. It was a confession, a declaration, a lifetime of pain and passion poured into 4.5 minutes of musical genius. Clara was lost to the world. Her fingers were no longer hers. They were conduits for 5 years of pent-up grief, frustration, and fury. The storm in the music was her own. The soaring melody was the voice of her buried dream, screaming to be free. She poured every ounce of her broken heart into the keys, the music a cleansing fire that burned away the shame and the fear. The piece reached its thundering climax, a final defiant roar that shook the very foundations of the ballroom. And then, with a final crashing chord, it was over. Clara's hands fell from the keys, landing softly in her lap. Her chest was heaving, her hair slightly disheveled. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer expectant or mocking. It was a profound, echoing silence, thick with awe and disbelief. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the faint hum of the city outside the glass walls. The entire room, filled with some of the most powerful and jaded people in Chicago, was utterly, completely, and reverently still. The spell was broken by a single person, not with polite applause, but with an explosive, heartfelt bravo that echoed through the room. It was Nathaniel Donovan. He began to clap, a sharp, resonant sound that cut through the stunned silence. One by one, as if waking from a trance, others joined him. The tentative smattering of applause quickly swelled into a roar, a thunderous standing ovation that crashed over Clara like a wave. It was more than just appreciation for a good performance. It was an apology, a collective act of penance for their complicity in her intended humiliation. They weren't clapping for a waitress anymore. They were clapping for an artist. Clara sat on the piano bench, blinking as if coming up for air after being submerged. The sound was disorienting. Applause was something she had dreamed of as a teenager, a fantasy that had felt as distant as the moon. To hear it now in this place under these circumstances was surreal. She looked out at the sea of faces. Faces that had been twisted with mockery moments before were now alight with genuine admiration and shock. She saw Isabel Ashworth, whose perfectly composed face was now streaked with tears. She was clapping so hard her hands were red. But the face that held Clara's attention was Damien Sterling's. He stood frozen amidst the adulation, his hands limp at his sides. His face was a thundercloud of fury and disbelief. He had been publicly upstaged at his own party by his own victim. The power dynamic he had worked so hard to establish had been obliterated in under 5 minutes. She hadn't just played the piano. She had played him, and he had lost spectacularly. As the applause began to subside, Nathaniel Donovan moved through the crowd, his eyes locked on Clara. He had an air of quiet authority that parted the guests before him. "That was breathtaking," he said, his voice low but carrying with sincerity. He reached into his jacket pocket. "My name is Nathaniel Donovan. The nuance, the emotional control. I haven't heard Chopin played with that much honesty since my father conducted Ashkenazi in '88. Who did you study with? Clara was so overwhelmed she could barely form words. My mother taught me. And then a professor at the Chicago Music College, Dr. Alistair Finch. Nathaniel's eyebrows shot up. Alistair Finch. He was a legend, a notorious perfectionist. He didn't take students, he curated prodigies. He extended a simple, elegant business card. I would be honored if you would call me. We should talk. Before Clara could take the card, another hand shot out, slapping Nathaniel's away. It was Damien. All right, party trick's over. He sneered, his voice dripping with venom. He was desperately trying to claw back control, to reframe her genius as a cheap gimmick. Very impressive. You can bang on the keys. Get back to the bar. People are getting thirsty. The crowd murmured, shocked by his blatant disrespect after such a display of talent. Nathaniel stepped between them, his posture calm but immovable. Sterling, have you no decency? This young woman just gave a world-class performance. Show some respect. Respect? Damien laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. I respect my employees for doing the job they're paid for. Her job is to pour drinks, not throw a tantrum on my piano. He turned to Clara, his eyes blazing with a cold fire. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a thick money clip, and peeled off 5 $100 bills. He crumpled them into a ball and threw them at her feet. There, he spat. A tip for the performance. Now get off the stage. You're done. The gesture was so crass, so openly contemptuous, it sucked the air from the room. He wasn't just dismissing her. He was trying to rebrand her, to reduce her art back into a simple transaction, to put her firmly back in her place as the hired help he could buy and sell. Clara stared at the crumpled bills on the floor. A moment ago, that money would have represented a solution to a week's worth of problems: groceries, a late utility bill, a new pair of comfortable shoes for work. It was survival. But something had fundamentally changed inside her. The woman who had walked to the piano was not the same woman sitting there now. The music had reminded her of who she was, of the part of her soul she had locked away. That part of her was worth more than $500. It was priceless. Slowly she stood up. She looked not at the money, but directly into Damien Sterling's furious eyes. Her voice when she spoke was quiet, but it resonated with a newfound strength that filled the entire ballroom. Thank you for the offer, Mr. Sterling, she said, her tone icy and clear. But I don't work here anymore. She turned, looked at the shocked face of her manager, Mr. Peterson, and gave him a small apologetic nod. Then, with her back straight and her head held high, she walked away from the piano, past the stunned guests, and straight towards the service exit, leaving the crumpled money lying on the floor like the trash it was. She didn't look back. The ballroom was silent once more, but this time the silence wasn't about her. It was about Damien. Every eye was on him, the cruel millionaire left standing alone in the wreckage of his own failed spectacle, his ugly attempt at power exposed for all to see. He had tried to be the ringmaster, but the lioness had refused to be tamed. The cold Chicago air was a shock to Clara's system as she pushed through the service exit and found herself in a stark concrete alleyway. The roar of the party was gone, replaced by the distant wail of sirens and the hum of the city's nightlife. She leaned against the brick wall, her legs finally giving way to the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She slid down to the ground, heedless of the grime on her uniform. Tears she hadn't realized she was holding back began to stream down her face. They weren't tears of sadness or humiliation, but of release. It was the breaking of a dam that had been holding back 5 years of grief, regret, and suffocated dreams. She had quit her job. She had no savings. She had no idea what she would do tomorrow. For the first time in a long time she was terrified, and she had never felt so alive. She had just started to get her breathing under control when the alley door creaked open. Clara flinched, expecting a security guard or a furious Mr. Peterson. Instead, it was Nathaniel Donovan. He was holding her thin coat, which she had left in the staff locker room. He didn't say anything at first. He simply walked over, draped the coat over her shaking shoulders, and sat on the pavement a respectable distance away from her. "Are you all right?" he finally asked, his voice gentle. Clara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and gave a shaky laugh. "I have no idea. I think I just made the stupidest and best decision of my life all at once." "For what it's worth," Nathaniel said, looking at the city lights reflecting in a puddle, "I think you just took your life back. What Sterling did in there was unforgivable. What you did was unforgettable." He held out the business card again. This time her hand was steady as she took it. Nathaniel Donovan, Vice President, Donovan Artists Foundation. Clara's breath caught in her throat. The Donovan Artists Foundation was legendary. It was a non-profit organization founded by his family that discovered and sponsored exceptionally talented musicians, artists, and performers, giving them the resources to pursue their careers without financial burden. It was the modern equivalent of the Medici patronage. Winning a Donovan Fellowship was like being struck by artistic lightning. "Your father is Sir Malcolm Donovan," she whispered, the realization dawning on her. Nathaniel smiled. "He is, which means I spent my entire childhood backstage at the world's greatest concert halls. I've heard them all. And I can tell you with absolute certainty, Clara, that what you have is exceedingly rare. That wasn't just technique. That was soul." He stood up and brushed off his trousers. "My offer is real. Please call me. The foundation holds private auditions. We could arrange everything. Dr. Finch would have wanted me to." He gave her a respectful nod and turned to leave. "Oh, and Clara," he said, pausing at the door, "don't worry about tonight. My driver will take you home. Wait here." He disappeared back inside before she could protest. Meanwhile, back in the Celeste ballroom, the party was dying. The atmosphere had been poisoned beyond recovery. Clara's defiant exit and Damien's public humiliation had left a stain on the celebratory mood. Guests were making their excuses and leaving in droves, whispering about the scene they had just witnessed. Damien was in a corner drinking whiskey, his face like a stone mask. Richard Klein was trying to do damage control, but the harm was done. The story of the night would be all over the city's social circles by morning. Isabel Ashworth found him there. She stood before him, her arms crossed, her expression cold. "That was disgusting, Damien," she said, her voice devoid of its usual placid tone. "Even for you." "She was a waitress who got out of line," he snarled, throwing back the rest of his drink. "She needed to be put in her place." "Her place?" Isabel's laugh was brittle. "It seems her place is at a concert grand piano and yours is throwing money at things you don't understand. You didn't just try to humiliate her. You tried to humiliate her art. There's a difference." "What's gotten into you?" "Defending the help now. Before my father's company went public and before I met you," Isabel said, her voice dangerously low. "I was on an art scholarship at the Sorbonne in Paris. I lived in a tiny flat with no heating and I ate bread and cheese for dinner. I was a painter. And I was happy." Damien stared at her, genuinely shocked. He knew her family was wealthy, but he had never known this detail of her past. He had assumed her life had always been one of effortless luxury. "My family decided it wasn't a suitable life for an Ashworth," she continued, her eyes glistening. "They convinced me to come home to take my rightful place in society, a place that apparently involves being engaged to a man who gets his kicks by trying to crush the spirit of a girl who reminds me exactly of who I used to be." She slowly pulled the enormous diamond engagement ring from her finger. It had been the talk of the town, a gaudy 12-carat symbol of Damien's wealth. She held it out to him. "This engagement, this party, this entire life. It's a gilded cage, Damien. And I'm done playing the songbird." She didn't place the ring in his hand. She dropped it. It hit the polished marble floor with a soft final clink, spinning for a moment before coming to a rest. Isabel Ashworth turned and walked away, leaving Damian Sterling completely alone in his grand ballroom surrounded by the ruins of his perfect evening, the ghost of a melody he couldn't comprehend still hanging in the air. The next few weeks were a blur for Clara. True to his word, Nathaniel Donovan had arranged for one of the Foundation's cars to take her home that night. The following morning, she had called the number on his card, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had expected a secretary a series of hurdles to jump through. Instead, Nathaniel himself answered on the second ring. "Clara, I was hoping you'd call." He didn't waste any time. Within a week, Clara found herself in the Donovan Artists Foundation building, a beautifully restored brownstone in Lincoln Park that felt more like a sanctuary than an office. She stood before a panel of 3 judges in a small, acoustically perfect recital hall. Nathaniel was there not as a judge, but as an observer, offering a reassuring smile from the back. Clara was terrified, but it was a different kind of fear. It wasn't the fear of humiliation, but the fear of hope. The fear of wanting something so badly it hurt. She sat at the piano, another Steinway, but this one felt like a friend, not a weapon, and she played. She played Bach for its structure, Beethoven for its passion, and Debussy for its color. She played for the judges, for Nathaniel, and once again for her mother. When she finished, the head of the panel, a severe-looking woman named Dr. Lena Petrova, a legendary pianist in her own right, simply removed her glasses, polished them, and said, "We will be in touch, Ms. Hayes." Clara left feeling emotionally drained, with no idea if she had succeeded or failed. 2 days later, a courier delivered a thick envelope to her apartment. Inside was a letter offering her the prestigious Donovan Rising Star Fellowship. It included a full stipend to cover her living expenses for 2 years, access to the Foundation's facilities, and private tutelage with Dr. Petrova herself. Clara sat on her lumpy sofa, the letter trembling in her hands, and wept. For the first time, they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. Her new life began immediately. The grueling double shifts were replaced by grueling 8-hour practice sessions. The scent of bleach was replaced by the scent of old wood and rosin. Her world, which had been gray and exhausting, was suddenly filled with color and sound. Dr. Petrova was demanding, pushing Clara harder than anyone ever had, deconstructing her self-taught habits and rebuilding her technique with architectural precision. "Talent is the marble," Dr. Petrova would say in her thick Russian accent. "Discipline is the chisel. Without it, you are just a pretty rock." Nathaniel became a constant supportive presence in her life. He was more than a patron. He became a friend. He would bring her coffee during her breaks, take her to symphony performances, and talk with her for hours about music, not just the technical aspects, but what it meant, what it could do. He spoke of music as a language that could express the inexpressible. Clara learned that Nathaniel had once been a promising cellist himself, but a hand injury in his youth had cut his performance career short. Instead of growing bitter, he had poured his passion into the other side of the industry, using his family's resources to lift up other artists. He understood in a way no one else could what it felt like to have your dream taken away. One evening, as they were walking through the park after a long day, Clara finally asked him something that had been bothering her. "That night," she began, "at the party, how did you know? How did you see something in me when everyone else just saw a waitress?" Nathaniel stopped by the lagoon looking at the city skyline. Damien and his friends look at people and see their function, their job title, their net worth. They're deaf to anything else. I learned a long time ago from my father to listen for the things people don't say. When Damien forced you to the piano, I saw your terror. But underneath it, I saw something else. A flicker of rage, of pride. I knew you weren't going to play chopsticks. I knew you were going to say something with that piano. I just didn't realize you were going to scream. Meanwhile, Damian Sterling's world was rapidly souring. The story of his disastrous engagement party had become a cautionary tale in Chicago's elite circles. He was no longer seen as a powerful player, but as a cruel, classless buffoon. His public breakup with Isabel Ashworth, a union that was meant to cement his social standing, had done the exact opposite. The Ashworth family, deeply embarrassed, quietly used their considerable influence to close doors that had once been open to him. His business began to suffer. A major merger he had been counting on fell through when the other company's board, filled with old money stalwarts who played golf with Isabel's father, cited character concerns. Deals that were once sure things suddenly stalled. His reputation, built on a fearsome but respected ruthlessness, was now tainted with a streak of petty cruelty that his partners found distasteful and, worse, unpredictable. He was a liability. The final twist came from an unexpected source. Richard Klein, Damien's sycophantic right-hand man, had been approached by Nathaniel Donovan's company for a senior position. Seeing which way the wind was blowing, Richard jumped ship. As a parting gift to his new employer and a final act of revenge against his old one, he leaked documents detailing some of Damien's most aggressive and legally questionable business practices to a prominent financial journalist. The resulting exposé was devastating. It detailed predatory acquisitions, insider trading allegations, and a pattern of behavior that was not just unethical, but potentially criminal. The Sterling Tower was suddenly besieged by reporters, and the SEC announced a formal investigation. Damien Sterling, the man who had stood at the top of the world in his ballroom, was in freefall. 6 months passed. The Chicago winter thawed into a vibrant spring, mirroring the transformation in Clara's life. Under Dr. Petrova's exacting tutelage, she was not just regaining her former skill, she was surpassing it. The raw emotional power was still there, but now it was honed by a razor-sharp technique. She was discovering her own voice as a musician, not just interpreting the works of the masters, but starting to compose her own pieces, melodies born from her experiences, from the quiet desperation of her waitress years to the soaring hope of her new reality. The Donovan Foundation decided she was ready. They secured her a debut performance, not in a small recital hall, but as a featured soloist with the Chicago Civic Orchestra at the illustrious Orion Concert Hall. The event was a high-profile showcase for emerging artists, attended by critics, philanthropists, and music industry executives from around the world. The piece she would be playing was Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, a titan of the repertoire known for its romantic sweep and formidable technical demands. But there was a surprise in the program for her encore. She would be debuting an original composition. The news sent a ripple of excitement through the city's classical music scene. Whispers of the ballroom prodigy had circulated for months, growing into a mythic tale. Now everyone wanted to see if the legend was real. Clara was a bundle of nerves and excitement. The girl who had been terrified to touch a piano in front of a mocking party crowd was now preparing to perform for thousands. Her face, once etched with exhaustion, now glowed with purpose. She and Nathaniel had grown closer, their friendship deepening into a quiet, unspoken affection built on mutual respect and shared passion. He was her biggest champion, handling the press and logistics, shielding her from the pressure so she could focus solely on her music. One afternoon, a week before the concert, Clara had an unexpected visitor at the foundation. It was Isabel Ashworth. She looked different. Her severe, elegant bun was gone, replaced by a softer, looser hairstyle. She wore a simple dress instead of designer couture. She looked younger, less burdened. "I hope I'm not intruding," Isabel said, her voice hesitant. "Not at all," Clara replied, genuinely surprised. I needed to apologize," Isabel said, looking her directly in the eye. "For that night, for my silence. I stood by and watched him treat you that way, and I did nothing. There's no excuse for it. I was a coward trapped in a life I thought I couldn't escape." She explained how Clara's performance had been a catalyst for her own life, a shattering chord that had woken her up. She had left Damien, re-enrolled in online art history courses, and was now volunteering at a downtown art gallery. She was painting again. "You reminded me that your talent, your soul, is the one thing no one can take from you unless you let them," Isabel said, a genuine smile reaching her eyes. "So, thank you, and I'm so sorry." Clara was deeply moved. I accept your apology, and thank you." As Isabel was leaving, she paused. "I heard about Damien," she said quietly. "The investigation, the company, it's all collapsing. He's lost everything." There was no triumph in her voice, only a sad finality. He built his entire identity on that power. I don't know who he is without it. The news gave Clara a strange, hollow feeling. She had every reason to feel vindicated, to celebrate his downfall, but all she felt was a profound sense of pity for a man so empty that his only way to feel big was to make others feel small. The night of the concert arrived. The Orion Concert Hall was electric, buzzing with anticipation. Backstage, Clara stood in the wings, her heart a frantic drum solo against her ribs. She was dressed in a simple, elegant, dark blue gown, a stark contrast to the black waitress uniform she had once worn. Nathaniel stood with her, his presence a calming anchor. "You're not that girl at the bar anymore," he said softly, as if reading her mind. "You're not even the girl who played the winter wind. You're the artist you were always meant to be. Go out there and show them who Clara Hayes is." He squeezed her hand, a gesture of profound support and affection. She squeezed back, her nerves steadying. He was right. This wasn't about revenge or proving anyone wrong. This was about claiming her future. The stage manager gave her the cue. The house lights dimmed. A hush fell over the massive auditorium. Clara took a deep breath and walked out of the wings into the brilliant, warm glow of the spotlight. The applause that greeted her was deafening. She walked towards the magnificent piano at the center of the stage, the orchestra behind her, a sea of expectant faces before her. It was a world away from the Celeste ballroom, but for a fleeting moment she was back there, a scared girl facing down a tyrant. Then she looked at the keyboard, sat down, and the entire world melted away. There was only the music. As the conductor raised his baton, Clara's eyes fluttered shut. She took one last breath, not as a waitress or a prodigy, but as an artist. And then she began to play. The opening chords of Rachmaninoff's concerto filled the hall, deep and resonant like the tolling of a great bell. From that moment on, Clara held the entire audience in the palm of her hand. She didn't just play the notes, she told a story. The music flowed from her, a torrent of passion, melancholy, and triumphant hope. The orchestra swelled around her, and she navigated the concerto's treacherous passages with a combination of breathtaking power and exquisite tenderness. It was a masterful performance. When the final triumphant chord rang out, the hall erupted. The standing ovation was immediate and explosive. People were shouting, weeping, overcome by the emotional journey she had taken them on. She bowed, her face flushed with exhilaration, accepting the bouquets of flowers and the adoration of the crowd. But it wasn't over. After several curtain calls, she returned to the stage alone. The applause slowly subsided as the audience settled in, waiting for the promised encore. The house lights remained dim, a single spotlight illuminating her at the piano. "The piece I am about to play is a new composition," she said. Her voice amplified softly throughout the hall. It was steady and clear. "It's a story about finding your voice in a silent room. It's called The Celeste Rhapsody." A murmur went through the audience. Many of them knew the story of that night. The music she played was unlike anything they had heard before. It began with a quiet, hesitant melody full of longing and a touch of sadness, the theme of the invisible waitress, the ghost in the gilded cage. Then the music grew, agitated, dissonant chords clashing like breaking glass, reflecting the cruelty and chaos of her public humiliation. Suddenly, the chaos resolved into a powerful, furious torrent of notes, a clear musical echo of the winter wind, a storm of defiance and reclaimed power. But then the storm subsided and the theme transformed again. It became a melody of soaring, breathtaking beauty, a theme of hope, of second chances, of the quiet, unshakable strength of the human spirit. It was the sound of a dream resurrected. As she played the final, gentle, hopeful notes, she felt a presence in the wings. She knew without looking that Nathaniel was there watching her, his heart swelling with pride. She knew Dr. Petrova was in the audience, a rare small smile on her face. She knew Isabel was there finding her own peace in the music. The performance was her story, a story she now owned completely. After the concert, in the celebratory chaos of the reception, Clara felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned expecting a well-wisher and froze. It was Damian Sterling. He was almost unrecognizable. The impeccably tailored suit was gone, replaced by a simple, ill-fitting blazer. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a deep-set weariness in his eyes. He looked smaller, diminished, a king without a kingdom. He was holding a single, slightly wilted rose. "Ms. Hayes," he said, his voice raspy. He couldn't meet her eye. I don't expect you to understand, or to forgive me. I just needed to say it." He finally looked up, and for the first time Clara saw not a monster but a broken, insecure man. "All my life," he said, his voice cracking, "I fought my way up from nothing. I thought having money, having power meant I could never be hurt or looked down on again. But it just made me hollow. When I saw you, I saw talent. Real God-given talent. Something I could never buy or bully into existence, and it made me feel so small, so pathetic, that the only thing I could think to do was to try and crush it, to prove it was worthless. I was wrong. What you have is the only thing in this world that's real." He extended the rose. "I am sorry. For everything." Clara looked at the man before her, the architect of her deepest humiliation and the unwitting catalyst of her greatest triumph. She felt no anger, no hatred, only a quiet, profound sense of peace. She had already won. She gently took the rose from his hand. "I forgive you, Mr. Sterling," she said softly. "I hope you can find a way to forgive yourself." He nodded, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. He turned without another word and disappeared into the crowd, a ghost leaving his own haunting behind. A moment later, Nathaniel was at her side. He wrapped his arm around her. "Are you okay?" Clara looked at the rose in her hand, then up at his concerned face, and then out at the glittering party celebrating her. She was surrounded by friends, by music, by a future that was brighter than all the chandeliers in the Celeste ballroom. "I am," she said, a brilliant, genuine smile lighting up her entire face. "I really am." She had found her voice not just in the music but in her life. And it was a symphony. Clara's story is a powerful reminder that true worth isn't measured in dollars or social status, but in the passion and talent that lies hidden within each of us. She walked into that ballroom as a waitress, but she walked out an artist. Not because her talent suddenly appeared, but because she found the courage to unleash it. Her journey shows us that the most profound strength is often found in our most vulnerable moments, and that sometimes the greatest stage is the one you build for yourself from the ashes of humiliation. If Clara's story of resilience and triumph moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own hidden strength. And don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell for more real-life stories about underdogs who refuse to be silenced. What part of Clara's journey resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments below.